Hello, Kate from the Narrate team here. As we continue in week 2 of the Resurrection Message series, Seriously, Adam asks, why is the literal resurrection so important? He shares some text and scripture to speak to this core topic.
Hi, you guys. How are you? It's great to be with you. So I was just thinking to myself, I'm so excited to help somebody else with their building and hope we never have one. I think the lights are a little high, guys. Yeah, thanks. Feels awfully bright. Okay. Anyway, I was thinking, I'm grateful to help you guys with your building and hope we never have one of our own. You know, like it's kind of a fun tension. It's supposed to be funny, but probably must have been more awkward because you're all just staring at me. So my friend Bob Strutz, when I first met Bob, he was already in his late 70s. Bob was on staff at Harvest years ago with us. He still may be. He was on staff about 20 hours a week, and his job was hospital visitation and hospice care. So he had a very lighthearted job, the kind of job that takes a lifetime of experience and a very big prayer muscle to do and do well, and Bob was great about it, great at it. But in his late 30s, Bob actually led a church in Billings. I don't know the name of the church. It was a smallish church, and in that church was a part of a denomination of churches that was a type of denomination that the infrastructure, the legalese of the denomination was that the denomination owned everything. They owned the property, they owned the buildings, the parsonage. They also hired and fired the pastors. I mean, they were the controlling mechanism. And it was in this season of Bob's life where the denomination or the association of churches that he was a part of was purchased by, which is kind of weird to get your brain around, was purchased by or merged with another association of churches. And there was nothing Bob could do about that. Whether or not he was for it or not didn't really matter. And so his next move after all that happened was to go to a meeting with a whole bunch of leaders from this merger, people impacted both from the purchasing and from the purchase side of things. It was held in Glendive, Montana, a booming metropolis at this point. I think we're talking early 70s, maybe mid-70s. And he went to this meeting. There were a couple hundred church leaders in the meeting. And at one point, the leader of the meeting, he was a bishop, I'm told. He said to this room full of local church leaders, he said, which of you guys believe in the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus? Now, this was a time in church history where it was kind of the in vogue conversation of was it literal or not. And Bob stood up. That's kind of Bob's style. He's kind of an emphatic person. And he watched a couple friends of his who he had been sitting with also stand up. But what happened next was horrifying to Bob because what happened next was that nobody else stood. And so here he was sitting in a room full of a couple hundred local church leaders, and there were 3 of them going, yep, I'll take a bullet for this one. Like Jesus, his body really did raise from the dead. Now that's kind of a big deal. And this morning, I say all that to say, well, if you weren't with us last week, we started this conversation called Seriously, and it's kind of a double meaning kind of a title because admittedly, if you're a guest with us, we're delving in theologically a little bit deeper than we normally do. Though part of my goal this morning is to demonstrate that though it seems like the deep weeds and maybe even the superficial part of the conversation from the Bible, I think the opposite's true. So it's serious in that sense. And at the same time, it's seriously in the sense of seriously? A physical body. He was alive, then he was dead, then he was alive again. Seriously? I mean, are we sure that wasn't people 2,000 years ago who didn't really understand how the medical world worked and that there wasn't a misunderstanding? Are we sure it wasn't metaphor? There's lots and lots of questions that stem from that. And if you didn't get to celebrate Easter with us last week, thanks, by the way, for your cooperation with the tickets. That's really what allows us to be an inviting place for the community. So thanks. That I know it's an inconvenience that you got to get a ticket to your own church, but that's kind of the place we are, is inconveniencing ourselves for our community. If you weren't with us, really what we talked about last week was that you can conclude what you want about Easter Sunday. I mean, that's the way facts work. There's facts, and we shouldn't confuse them with proof because you can't even really prove that George Washington existed. That's not the way history doesn't prove things in that sense. So there's facts. And then there's the way we arrange facts, and then there's attention. Whatever your field is, this is the reality. There's ideas, there's evidence, there's observations, there's truths, if that you prefer that. And then there's your preconceived notion and emotional response and even intellectual arrangement of those facts. And then there's opinion, or if you prefer, there's faith or belief. But what we talked about last week was you can conclude whatever you want about the facts around Easter Sunday, but I hope if you left with nothing else, you left with this rooted conviction that whatever you conclude, what you can't disagree on is that the early church was started for any other reason other than the firm conviction that the tomb was empty. N.T. Wright says it well when he says Christianity, after all, is not based upon a set of ideas. It's not based upon a set of philosophical or spiritual observations. Christianity is, from a historical standpoint, Jesus' movement it's based upon a historical day. There was nothing going on. Everybody had gone back to work. They'd given up. The movement was over. And then their leaders showed up in a body again, and they started going, whoa. Remember, the men who followed Jesus, they completely quit. A few of the women hung around. And so this morning, what I want to ask is the question, like, why is the resurrection so important? What's the big deal? In fact, I was meeting with a friend here a couple weeks ago. He's a new friend. There's a couple of pastor-ish people in town that I have had the privilege of getting to know. One of them is David Casey, and you guys know him well. The fun thing about David is he leads at Our Lady of the Valley Catholic Church, and he and I run together on Mondays, and he teaches here and does some music here, and it's been a very fun, healthy friendship to see how little we actually disagree on. And he's introduced me to a friend of his, they go way back, who also leads a church in town, and that, I mean, dare I say that church is about as conservative as you could get. I'm not saying that positively or negatively. It just is. I mean, it is way over there, like King James only, way over there. And so the leader of that place, it's been a lot of fun getting to know him. It's hilarious because we sit down and we have coffee and we have these conversations like King James, and I'm going like, ales for trails. And he's going, blah, blah, blah. It's crazy to try to figure out. It's awesome. So he said to me last time we met, he said, I was talking to David earlier, David Casey, and he said, David was, and you could tell he was having this like, David, I don't understand this place called Narrate and this dude called Adam, and I don't get it. And David said to him, these are his words, he said, what you have to understand about them is they just don't put very many lines in the sand. Like there's just not very many things, he said, where they go like, step across this and you're out. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not. I'm taking it as one. I like it that way. But to be honest with you, the resurrection is one of those for me. In fact, if you took one of those books, and there's more copies there if you didn't last week, in that letter I said, like, you asked me to take a bullet, and there's not a lot of things I would take a bullet for, but this is one of them. And I think the question that I want to begin to beg this morning is why? It takes me back to one of my most memorable moments in grad school when I was going back and forth between Billings and George Fox in Portland, and one of the professors, every school kind of has the professor you're waiting to get, and one of them, his name was Dr. Daniel Bruner. He's the neatest guy. He's Oxford educated, always wears a bow tie, does his quiet times by putting like a blow dryer down his shirt. So weird. He told us that one time, like the ones that have the long hoses, like that was, so try that in your chair time if it's a little dry. Anyway, and I learned that Oxford guys or gals, like Oxford educated people, they always wears Oxford socks. Did you know that? So always had these Oxford socks on. So I guess that doesn't make your Bronco socks so weird after all. Anyway, he started a church history class. And you don't typically think of church history as riveting material, but this is one of the classes we were looking forward to. He started the church history lecture by saying, I was a part of a cohort of 17 students. We took every credit for 60 plus credits together over the course of 3 years. We were from all over the country. Some of us worked for the church. Some worked in the nonprofit sector. Everybody had strong opinions. Most of us were 20-something. Some were 30-something. And then there were some wise people who were older than 30-something. And he started the class by saying, hey, so what does it take to be considered an orthodox follower of Jesus? Now, how do you answer that question? And how did you answer it when you were younger and you knew more things more definitively? And you might imagine what followed in the next 10 or so minutes of class as people just barraged him, a bunch of us, mostly from the evangelical sector. I mean, we talked faster than he could write, and he filled the whiteboard. And then finally there was that silly sense of like, wait a minute, I'm paying him for his opinion. I've just taken up all my time giving him mine. Like, we played this whole game wrong. And so finally there was this collective sense in the room of like, well, what do you say? And he, in classic brilliant fashion, more or less said to us, what I say doesn't matter. He said, this is church history. And what I can say to you decisively is for the first 300 years of church history, there were two issues. Two things you had to embrace. Despite all the issues, social and otherwise, on this board, two things you had to embrace. The first was the Trinity. And the second, he said, was the resurrection, or what you might call the divinity of Christ. And those two things are very yoked together. And so this morning, I want to ask that question, and yet if you're a guest here, you're already going like, geez, I guess I should have came during like some other series that was about real life, because this is about heaven. I don't even have time to think about heaven. But here's where I kind of want to get you, challenge that thinking a little bit. Like, do you ever find that the way Christianity, and maybe you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, maybe you don't, but do you ever find that the Christian conception of the afterlife kind of sounds boring? Like, you ever caught yourself thinking that? Like, we titled this message, Togas and Eternal Singing. Really? Like, seriously? I mean, with all due respect to Cade and the band and musicians and music and our responsibility and opportunity to worship God, I mean, does an infinite version of how great thou art really sound like your idea of paradise? I mean, seriously, like floating around in the clouds, like you can punch each other in the stomach, but there's no stomach to punch. There's this kind of non-material kind of spirit world thing, and you're just singing, and you're wearing this awkward toga. No one's wore those for 2,000 years, but for some reason, like that was the eternal apparel. Like, do you ever just find that, like, or do you ever catch yourself thinking this? Boy, I better get that done before I die. Like, we even have this thing called a bucket list, right? What is, if you just analyze this, and maybe you can do this during this week in your chair time, 1 Corinthians 15 would be a great place to go. So would 1 Peter chapter 1. But just like what are the implications of a bucket list? Do they not imply that the best part of life is this part? And doesn't that therefore involve us kind of speaking out of both sides of our mouth? Because isn't our message like, hey, so what happens after you die? Oh, paradise. Heaven. Doesn't sound like heaven to me, does it to you? See, my point is simply this. If you take away the resurrection, what you get is an eternal song and a toga. And that's kind of figurative because it's non-material. And if you include the resurrection, and what I want to suggest this morning is if you understand afterlife and resurrection the way the New Testament followers of Jesus understood it, then what you get is something entirely different than flitting about in the clouds without a body, but someone has a harp. Totally, totally different. And there's this. Do you ever find yourself offended? And maybe if you don't follow Jesus, this is why. Do you ever find yourself offended that at the notion that what you do with your life day in and day out doesn't matter? Ever seen one of those goofy bumper stickers? It's all going to burn anyway. Ever find yourself frustrated by the notion that the only thing in this life that matters is ensuring that when you die, you have the right answer to the pop quiz, who is Jesus and do you get to go to heaven? I know we're kind of touching on maybe some controversial stuff here, but do you ever find yourself offended at the notion that the only thing that matters about this life is whether or not you've learned to give intellectual assent to Jesus and the cross so that when you go to when you die, you can get in, not out of heaven? Ever find yourself going there? I was talking to a friend this week who watched one of the more recent low-budget Christian films. I don't have any commentary on them. Sorry, that's sarcastic, but she was telling me about them because she knows that, I mean, they have their place, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I just don't like them, and mostly I don't like them because they always make me mad, and I've never understood why they make me so mad until I was listening to my friend who watched the most recent one, and as she was describing it, and I could see her getting mad, I totally understood finally what makes me so mad. What makes me mad is the notion that as long as you figure out how to, like, say to somebody that you received Jesus before you died, you're going to heaven, then nothing else matters. And here's the irony of my anger and her anger and many of yours. I believe wholeheartedly that the most important decision that any person could make involves who was Jesus. Was the cross necessary? Was the tomb empty? I believe that why would I be doing this if I didn't? And yet, like many of you, I find it so offensive. And what I'm learning is technically what we're talking about is a school of thought called escapism. Escapism says, theologically and otherwise, that the material world is 110% bad. That your physical body is bad, that the urges are bad, that everything about the material world is bad, and therefore the gospel of escapism is you better know the right answer to the question so that when you die, you can get the heck out of here. See, Christianity without the physical bodily resurrection says that God has abandoned this whole creation project. He's sorry he ever did it, and what he yearns for is to be reunited with your soul in heaven forever and ever and ever, and you'll sing together. But Christianity with the resurrection, and I know this is deep weeds. I promise I won't do this to you, but about every 5.5 years. Christianity with the resurrection says something entirely different about life after death. N.T. Wright, he says it this way. He says the Bible talks a little bit about life after death, and it talks a whole bunch about life after death. So what I want to delve into this morning is if escapism isn't the deal, if teaching people in class, if helping keep the world in order, if studying for a physics final, if raising kids, if the things that you do in your everyday life matter, how do we know that? And what you see in the New Testament is over and over and over again, the author's telling a different story than the one I think mainstream Christianity tells us about togas and singing. You could start in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, we catch up with a guy named Peter. He spoke first, if you know what I mean. And in Acts chapter 3, shortly after Jesus' resurrection, he's offering a speech to some people about Jesus and what it all means. And listen to Acts 3:21. Jesus says, heaven must receive him, he's speaking of Jesus, until the time comes for God to restore, and what's the word? Everything. Well, certainly he must mean people, because that's what God cares about is souls, right? No, Peter says, heaven must receive him until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through the holy prophets. See, what we're going to bump into this morning is we think of a God whose chief concern is the soul of people, and everything else within the created order doesn't matter. But what you see in the first century is a people going, Jesus' resurrection means that God is really serious, not about rescuing us from creation, but about restoring creation. What's so fun about next Saturday going and helping Zach and Tiffany and these community leaders create a climbing gym? It's fun because we're restoring space. We're giving it new purpose, better purpose, redemptive purpose. Listen to Paul in the book of Romans. Now, anytime you go to Romans, you better be in a series called Seriously. But in Romans chapter 8, listen to what Paul says. For the creation, it waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. The what waits? The cosmos, the created order. In other words, there's implications for the created order for God's plans to unfold. Verse 22, Paul continues, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Now, I've never been in childbirth, nor do I care to. But I know intellectually that the process is lots of pain and lots of anticipation in anticipating something better on the other side. Does this sound like a God who's going, hey, we got to get you out of here? Does this sound like a God who after the resurrection says, next bus leaves in 30 minutes? Or does this sound like a God who's going, hey, I started something and I will finish it. I started something, and I will put it back together. It will once again serve its purpose. Is the story of the Bible a story of a God who is trying to vacuum people up to the sky so they can sing forever? Or does the story of the Bible start in a garden with a God who desires to throw a tent, pitch a tent, and hang out with them and be present with people in physical space? See, that's one of the questions we have to ask. Let me ask you this. What's the most emphatic statement anyone's ever made to you? Like the loudest proclamation of love or confidence, goodwill. You know, like maybe a boss promoted you, maybe getting a job, maybe you got a scholarship. Like the loudest proclamation of I believe in you. A wedding. That's quite an emphatic statement, isn't it? It's an emphatic statement of commitment and love and lots of other things. Baptism. We'll celebrate baptism again in September, and it's an emphatic statement of God to you and you to God. I was thinking about that this week, and it reminded me of my friend Brian, who leads Journey in Bozeman, and for whatever reason, one of the most emphatic statements that comes to mind for me is when the phone rang, and after having been told a couple years earlier by Brian that Journey would be a part of mothering this church, I know talk is cheap, and we knew it was going to take $250,000 to get started. And my phone rang, and it was Brian's executive pastor telling me that they had opened an account in Narrate's name and transferred $100,000 into the account. Like, there's the talk, and then there's the follow-through, right? There's the, like, Adam, we're with you. Here's a big chunk of your startup capital. If you get nothing else this morning, please just hear this. What Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 15, which is where you can really drill down on this stuff, and we will in just a moment. What Paul is saying is Jesus' resurrection was an emphatic statement that God wanted to restore the created order, that his desire wasn't to start over, and it wasn't to wipe the slate clean, and it wasn't to be united with you in an immaterial world, that God's dream of being united with people on beautiful physical space and his presence being among them, that project is something he has not abandoned, he has continued to be a part of, and the resurrection was step one in that process. Now, you can say that's crazy, you can say that sounds like you're sitting in a college mystics class, you can say whatever, but that's the foundation of what the New Testament is teaching. It's why the Jews were confused, because their belief was that God was going to do it all at once. And Jesus was resurrected, and what the church started to understand was, wait a minute, this is the first fruits. Like, this is part one, and I'm part like 5 million. Listen in 1 Corinthians 15. I can't decide if you're thinking hard or you're really bored, but here we go, verse 20. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have been fallen asleep. First fruit is like everyone gets it, but he gets it first. We don't use first fruits. We're not an agricultural culture. First fruits is it's opening your brand new Mac, right? Like, that's first fruits. Like, I get to do this first. It's getting off the chairlift and there's nothing but untouched powder. That's first fruits. It's a fishing hole and you're the first one there. That's first fruits. What Paul is saying is Jesus' resurrection was simply a precursor to what's coming for everybody else who follows him. Listen to verse 21. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. See, what the resurrection was, according to Paul, was the time in history when God appointed a person through whom he would restore the entire cosmos. He continues in 22. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. See, his claim, again, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it. Paul's claim is that it was a person named Adam who messed it up. And it would be a person. It's why Jesus' humanity was so important, who would make it right again, who would be the sacrifice. And then verse 23 really hits it. But each in turn, Christ the firstfruits, then when he comes, those who belong to him. See, what this gets at is what most of our Christian culture refer to when we refer to heaven. And what Paul's referring to when he refers to heaven are two completely different things. Like, you start listening to people, you start analyzing your own thoughts and preconceived notions. What we think of is when we die, we are instantly reunited with God without a body. And the scriptures certainly talk about that. You have Jesus saying to the thief on the cross next to him, he says, today you'll be with me in paradise. You have Paul saying things like, to live is Christ, to die is gain. So certainly there's a teaching that with death, your soul, that immaterial part of you, is reunited into the presence of God. But if we're to be honest, that's a very small percentage of what the New Testament talks about when it talks about the afterlife. What it's talking about in much broader terms, what it's talking about the vast majority of the time is resurrection. And resurrection is physical. It's material. It's God's commitment to the project. Listen to the way N.T. Wright says it. He says, resurrection is when the Son of Man returns and his are given new physical bodies on a new physical earth. So you have to remember how the story ends. In Revelation 21, this is among the most important places in the Bible. Listen to this. Then I saw, this is the end of the story. It started in a garden, it's ending here. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Stuck my head in Kate's office this week and went, bad news, there's no ocean. I think that's chaos, but I'm not sure. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his God." Is this a God who's trying to rescue you to some other non-material place, or a God who's going, no, we're going to do this, what we originally planned, it's going to happen. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. See, this is why I think it's dangerous when we go like, I got this bucket list, what's that? Well, it means all the things that I want to get done physically, I need to get done before I die. Because what Paul is saying is what's different about this and what's different about that is sin. He's not saying God got rid of the created order. He's saying God got rid of the corruption caused by sin within the created order. I think I trail run in heaven. Just saying. Kind of off the pages here, but there's a physical, I don't know that you get to spin cast fish because you kill fish, but you might get to fly fish. Just kidding. I'm just seeing if you're awake. It's physical. Now, what the Bible describes as what will our physical bodies be like, just because I know our brains go there, it's pretty nondescript. Because remember, Jesus himself was physical but not immediately recognizable. Like you might remember after the whole tomb incident, Mary Magdalene, she's outside the tomb, she's distraught, she's talking to someone inside the tomb, and then she turns and she sees a man that she thinks is the gardener, which is its own story because the story starts in a garden, but it's actually Jesus. And Jesus has to point out to her like, hey, I'm Jesus. It's like the most frustrating thing in the world when you rise from the dead and your friends don't recognize you. And you see this over and over and over. So we don't know, like, what age will you be? Like, do the surgeries go with you? None of those things do we know for sure. We know that it's physical, though. There's another place where Jesus shows up to the disciples, and they're, like, freaked out. He just kind of appears, and the text says that they concluded he was a ghost, which can lean to, like, see, he's non-material. But apparently, it wasn't that he was non-material. It was this, like, you're dead. I've never seen a ghost. This must be what one looks like. And listen in Luke 24 how this interaction goes. It's just, I think Jesus had just like a sense of humor. Look at this. It says, "Look at my hands and feet." So there's something continuous about that physical body and this one. Paul uses the analogy in 1 Corinthians 15 of a seed. It's like a pine cone in a 50-year-old tree. There's connection, but it's kind of confusing. Look at my hands and feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. And then listen to what he says. A ghost does not have flesh and bone, as you see I have. Interesting, isn't it, that Jesus was resurrected. He returned to the geographic space that he left and the people that he loved. Crazy, I know. We're in deep weeds here. Over and over and over again, you see Jesus. One day, these guys are walking towards the city called Emmaus, which is just a few miles outside of Jerusalem. This is right after the resurrection. And they're like confused. And they're going like, I don't understand this Jesus thing and what happened. And he's dead. And we thought he was special. And Jesus just joins them. I don't know, like Spock or something. He's just all of a sudden, he's walking with them. And he's helping them understand him. And then finally, he goes like, hey guys, I'm Jesus. And they're like, oh geez, I didn't even realize it. So there's something physical and yet something altogether nondescript. But it's physical. It's absolutely physical. And that's why in 1 Corinthians 15, listen to what Paul says. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. And there's not a person in this room who's not aware of the fact that the ultimate enemy of God's project is death. And what Paul is saying is what the resurrection promises is no longer is immaterial life inevitable. What he's saying is that what sin took away, which was eternal physical existence, the resurrection has restored. It's the death of death. Listen to the way N.T. Wright says this. Go ahead, next slide. The renewal of the world, which finally began in Jesus, will culminate with our having new sorts of body on an uncorrupted planet. They'll have a physical substance, but somehow won't wear out. They too will be free of the corruption of sin. It's the death of death. It's a physical world that isn't impacted by disease and hatred and all that comes with our broken physical world. Paul says it this way as he wraps it up. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God that he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. See, if Paul's right, then you can look to a physical renewal with mom, with grandpa, with dad, with that child. What he's saying is it's physical and it's absence of sin. Maybe next time someone says to you, man, you better get that done before you die, maybe you get to go like, no way, man, I've got forever. I've got forever. Maybe next time someone implies that heaven doesn't matter, maybe the answer is, well, wait a minute, it matters as much as this does. It's continuous. It's a continuation of this. See, if Paul was speaking toward this kind of like flitty, kind of purely intellectual thing, do you think he would have ended it this way? Listen to the way he ends what is the most theological, dense section on the resurrection in the entire Bible. Listen to verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord. Why? Because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Somehow, it matters. Somehow, when you put your hands in the soil and you commit yourself to the restoration project with Christ's power flowing through you, somehow there's continuity. N.T. Wright uses the analogy of the men who in hundreds of years ago would have spent an entire lifetime carving a single gargoyle out of a piece of rock. And he'd say they would have carved that gargoyle not having any idea how it fit into this magnificent cathedral called Notre Dame. And yet it did. And what Paul is saying is you see through a glass dimly, but it matters. Now this week, as I was delving deep into this, I couldn't help but think of a guy named Kramer. Anyway, he puts all of this in a completely different set of words. So we'll see. This may or may not work, but I've got a clip for you.
Gee, Kramer, I don't know what to say.
Say yes. Yes, George, yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Should I give you my keys? Is that the transaction, trading keys? Because Elaine has my keys.
Well, you can get them back.
I suppose I could.
Because you see, George, having the keys to Jerry's apartment, that kept me in a fantasy world. Every time I went over to his house, it was like I was on vacation. Better food, better view, better TV. Cleaner. Oh, much cleaner. That became my reality. I ignored the squalor in my own life because I'm looking at life, you see, through Jerry's eyes. It's living in twilight, George. Living in the shadows, living in the darkness. Like you.
Me?
Oh, yeah. I can barely see you, George.
All right, stop it, Kramer. You're freaking me out.
Hi. Are you ready to order?
Yeah, what's
No,
the
no,
use?
not yet, not yet. You get it.
Oh.
Do you ever yearn?
Yearn? Do I yearn?
I yearn.
You yearn?
Oh, yes, I yearn. Often I sit and yearn. Have you yearned?
Well, not recently. I craved. I crave all the time, constant craving. I haven't yearned.
Look at you.
Oh, Kramer, don't start.
No. You're wasting your life.
I am not. What you call wasting, I call living. I'm living my life.
Well, okay, like what? No, tell me. Do you have a job?
No.
You got money?
No.
Do you have a woman?
No.
Do you have any prospects?
No.
You got anything on the horizon?
No.
Do you have any action at all?
No.
Do you have any conceivable reason for even getting up in the morning?
I like to get the daily news.
George, it's time for us to grow up and be men. Not little boys.
Why?
I'm going to California. You know, I got the bug.
Yeah, I think I got a touch of something, too.
No, the acting bug. Ever since I was in that Woody Allen movie.
These pretzels are making me thirsty? That was one line. You got fired.
I know, but man, I never felt so alive. Now, you coming with me?
No, I'm not.
All right, suit yourself. But let's keep this between us. We're Key Brothers now.
Look, you're not really gonna go to California, are you?
Up here, I'm already gone.
I guess the question, if we can save this, I'm not sure, is what exactly is your understanding of what God yearns for? That's what spurred that in my head. Like, is he a God who yearns for your soul, immaterial that it is, to be reunited with him? Or is he sticking with his original plan, a created order with people that he loves on a planet that is profoundly beautiful and a lot of fun? I think that's the question of the resurrection. And so for those of you, maybe for you, you discredit Jesus on the grounds that it doesn't matter. You have too much to get done in this life. I guess my hope is that you'll see the connection, that the resurrection is the ultimate affirmation of the value of the created order. That Jesus, yes, he invites you to follow him and to receive his forgiveness, but it matters beyond just this trivial intellectual thing. It's about a God who wants to be with you. And I guess, quite frankly, I'm thinking about the way you think about heaven and the way you process those who have gone before you and the way you even process what you have to get done in this life, and that there's hope for you in this firm belief rooted in the scriptures that say, no. You haven't seen him or her for the last time. Like, you've got eternity to look forward to. And not just singing songs, though certainly worship will be part of it, but a physical life together. Jesus was returned to the geographic space he left and the people he loved. I'd just like to pray. I know this is kind of heavy, and we're going to wrap up with a song. God, Lord, obviously, Lord, there's a ton to take in here. And as we kind of rekindle grief and doubt and worry, and we re-raise the mystery of faith and who's in and who's out, God, I guess I just say thanks. Thanks that though we see through the glass dimly, though it's obviously far from clear, thanks for the resurrection. And Jesus, many of us, we believe in that resurrection and what it's telling us. We love you, God.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.